ora koutou, and welcome to the Beginner's Guide to ACC for Acupuncturists. Ko tina ni koe tōku ingoa. I'm an ACC Provider Engagement and Performance Manager. A big part of my role is helping providers understand ACC processes and how to work with us. I'll be presenting today with my colleague, Chao Fu.
Kia ora koutou, my name is Chao Fu. I am a clinical advisor for allied healthcare, and we provide in-house clinical expertise and guidance for ACC. I'm a physiotherapist and qualified in TCM acupuncture.
Now, I'd just like to note that we have re-recorded this webinar due to some technical issues on the night. And we have a question section at the end of the webinar where we'll go through answers to some of the questions that we were asked. We've also removed the CPD information from this presentation as a CPD point was only available to those who attended live on the night. Now we have our colleague Ben working on the chat again in the background. Between us, we'll do our best to answer all of your questions with the relevant chapters of information, including those questions that we had received in advance. Now sit back and we'll get started. So these are the topics that we'll be covering today, but we only have an hour, and ACC with all that we do is a really huge subject. So we can't tell you everything and you wouldn't remember it all if we did. So our aim is to give you the basics to get started with, as well as a copy of this webinar afterwards. It's packed with handy links, information and prompts, so you can use it as a resource to help you in your ACC mahi moving forward. As we move through the presentation, we will work through the questions that we've received. So first things first, it's useful to know a little bit about ACC, who we are and what we do to help you understand the system that you're a part of. So ACC has been around since April 1974. It's based on the work of Sir Owen Woodhouse, and he identified that when Kiwis have accidents, those accidents can have a massive negative impact on their lives, as well as those of their whānau, if they don't receive the right support. His recommendations for how to address this are the basis of ACC today and guide our work in injury prevention and supporting appropriate treatment and rehab, as well as providing compensation or financial support while our kiritaki, our clients, recover. So ACC is a Crown entity that was created as a result of Sir Owen's recommendations. The rules governing ACC are clearly laid out in legislation, the Accident Compensation Act 2001. Under the Act, no matter what time of day or what you were doing, even if it was a bit silly looking back, ACC can help, so long as you meet certain criteria. And Chao Fu will talk more about these criteria shortly. The ACC system provides the same access to treatment for all New Zealanders and visitors. A lot of people wonder why visitors are covered, but because we're a no-fault system, we've given up the right to sue. And if we didn't provide visitors the same support, we'd have to let them keep that right to sue and run two different systems at the same time. So ACC is basically a large insurance scheme. We all contribute levies to the scheme, so it's always there to support us, members of our whānau and our communities when we might need it. We also need to make sure that we all use the system appropriately because it impacts on everyone and costs us all if we don't. So I'll just hand over to Chao Fu now to talk to you about cover.
Thanks, Tina. So, what is cover? Just like an insurance scheme, ACC is governed by the Accident Compensation Act 2001, which determines what we do and what we cover. So if we put it simply, cover means that ACC accepts a client has had a personal injury as a result of an accident. And once the client has cover, it means ACC can support them with the things they need because of that injury. Here are some main types of injuries that we can cover: physical injuries, mental injuries, treatment injuries, work-related gradual process injuries, which has a specific legislative criteria that must be met. And of course, since October 2022, maternal birth injuries. Now, this is a brief overview of cover on the slide. So for more information on understanding claims and cover, please also check our online resources on our website at acc.co.nz. Here are some things that we cannot cover: illnesses and diseases, age-related degenerative changes, gradual process or wear and tear injuries, unless it meets the work-related gradual process injury criteria. And this final point needs special mention, which is stress and emotions. So in the TCM acupuncture context, the Shen-related issues, for example, may not fall under mental injury category. This is important because acupuncturists are in a unique position where we operate under two different paradigms of traditional Chinese medicine and Western medicine. So we need to understand that difference and be able to demonstrate what you are treating is still within the covered injury category. And this usually means that you will need to demonstrate in your clinical notes how the TCM and the Western medical science clinical reasoning fits together, because we want to make sure that you can get paid for the treatment services you provide. So what is an injury? ACC covers personal injury. And in this context, it means physical injuries. So physical or bodily harm or damage, which is the area that commonly acupuncturists work in. There is also, of course, the mental injury, the maternal birthing injury we mentioned before. And again, for more details, please check out online resources. The legislation is quite prescriptive on what an accident is. There's always an injury event or a series of events that involves an application of external force to the body, and that can include gravity. So for example, lifting a heavy object, tripping over, falling over, or say, even being hit by a bus. And it can also be a sudden movement of the body to avoid that force. For example, jumping out of the way of that bus and injured yourself by pivoting on your knee. But that means that internal force are not covered. So for example, if you are coughing or sneezing and put out your back, that's not covered. Now, you may ask, what is a series of events? In simple terms, basically it means that it's not one single event, like falling over or getting hit by a bus. Series of events occurs over a defined period of time, usually relates to an unusual activity for that person. In other words, they're doing something that they're not used to doing and developed an injury as a result. So for example, chopping wood over the weekend, causing a lower back strain. It's important, though, to note that a series of events is a set period of time that is a very short span. So we're talking about hours and a few days continuously, not an accumulation over weeks or months or years. So now that we know about injury and accident, what does that all mean and what do we need to know about them? We need to know about them because ACC need to see the link between the accident event and the injury as a result. So this is known as causation or causal link. It is very important to demonstrate this causal link because it is possible to have an accident without an injury and vice versa. It is possible to have an injury without an accident. For example, when babies learn to walk, they will trip over and fall over, but they can be fine with no bumps, bruises, and they just get up and keep going. So there's an accident event, like the falling, but no actual injury. Similarly, physical injuries like strokes or heart attacks can occur without an accident event. So it is important that both must be present and that you can demonstrate that there's a clear link between the two. And ACC relies on you as a clinician to demonstrate that clinical reasoning through your clinical records so that we can see that the treatment service or support that you have provided are needed as a direct result of the covered injury. And here is a picture of the quick guide on causation. We'd like to encourage you to please go and have a look at the quick guide and the video about causation on our website. Normally during your clinical assessment, when you take the history, like the onset of symptoms and the description of what happened, that'll give you a reasonable clue as to whether that event caused an injury. Sometimes, though, it won't make sense, like a random onset of symptoms, where a patient may tell you that they simply woke up with the pain, or if they were not able to recollect any specific event at all. And when that happens, it's pretty safe to say that it's probably unlikely that an event or an accident caused that presenting complaint or injury that they want treatment for. But of course, sometimes patients will recall an event, but it simply doesn't fit in with the picture that you see in front of you. For example, if the patient presents with carpal tunnel syndrome, but relate the onset of the symptom to taking out their groceries from their trunk of the car last week, it's pretty safe to say also that it's unlikely one single event of lifting groceries out of the trunk have caused the carpal tunnel syndrome. Now, if the claimed accident is a series of events, the identified physical injury needs to be consistent with that series of events. For example, with a sore wrist first noticed after a week of intense cooking, say when preparing for a Chinese New Year feast, is that an actual sprain injury? Or is that actually the tenosynovitis, like mummy's thumb, from looking after their 3-month-old baby? So these are the important clinical differentiations that you will need to make. And it is also important to remember that symptoms alone are not physical injuries for ACC purposes. If the patient presents with pain, weaknesses, or swelling, there may be a physical injury that's causing these symptoms and may be coverable. But we will rely on your clinical reasoning through your assessment findings to show what that physical injury is. So we want to encourage you to think about what you're treating exactly and whether that truly represents an actual physical damage or injury, and also keeping in mind the body's natural healing timeframes. As we all know, the body is very good at healing itself in normal situations. So simple sprain and strain injury would normally heal within days or weeks, rather than months or years. So if it is not getting better, and sometimes even getting worse, we really encourage you to think about what the underlying cause is, especially in the TCM context. Say, for example, your patient has a long history of recurrent episode of non-specific lower back pain. Sometimes they may have an accident event which coincides with their back pain symptoms, like bending down to pick up a pen or piece of paper. So they have a claim lodged for a lumbar sprain. Sometimes they don't have a recent event, but may have an earlier claim from 6 months ago, say standing up from a chair and felt a twinge in the back. So we really encourage you to think about whether the sore back that they keep coming back for treatment and the sore back that they're presenting in front of you is really from standing up from the chair 6 months ago, or is that maybe from their underlying, say, kidney qi deficiency, or and just happened that they have a claim, or is there something even more serious like cancer? which was the case of a friend of mine. He thought that his recurring back pain was a muscle strain from a martial art training, but it never got better and he kept needing treatment. And unfortunately, it turned out to be cancer. So it's things like this that it's important to keep in mind, that just because there is a covered claim, or if there was an accident event and the patient now has symptom afterwards or continued symptom afterwards, that does not automatically mean that a causal link is established. Let's have a look at a few examples. This example is a very simple and straightforward one. Gary was running on a bush track on a peaceful Sunday morning. He tripped and he fell, dislocating his left shoulder. In this case, you have an accident, which is tripping and falling, and the injury, dislocating his left shoulder. So very nice and easy, clear-cut example. But in a clinical setting, not everything is as simple and straightforward. In this example, Jenny was in a minor traffic accident. And the obvious physical injury here was the bruising from the seatbelt. But what about the lower back? Remember, pain here is a symptom. So you will need to identify what that physical injury is that's causing that pain. Is it a back sprain? Is it a kidney qi deficiency? Or something even more serious? And here's a third example, so which can get even more trickier. So in this case for Tama, there was an accident event at rugby 3 weeks ago where he twisted his back, but there may not have been an injury. And also, he has been fine for a while. And now he's presenting again with the onset of symptoms. So the important thing to think about here is, where is the causal link? Is it still accident related? Is it accident related? So we will rely on your clinical reasoning and your clinical records to help and establish that causal link. Now let's look at how to work with ACC clients. When treating patients under ACC claim, here are some basic but key claim information that you will need to have. You will need to have the claim number. You will need to know when the accident is. You need to know what injury is covered and whether they have had any other acupuncture treatments before. Now, you need to check these key claim information to ensure that you are being asked to treat the covered injury. And they're also important to help you to decide whether there is a clear causation. And somewhat more importantly, whether the client has already used some of the available treatment and how long ago they have used it, because that could determine whether you get paid for your services or not. If you're unsure about these information, like the accident date or what the covered injuries are, you can contact ACC, either call the provider helpline or use our online resources through our website. Sometimes the patients may not have a claim lodged when they come to you, but you believe after your assessment that they should have a claim because the injury was caused by an accident, then please refer your patients back to the GP to get an ACC 45 claim form lodged with ACC. So when there is a newly covered claim, ACC has pre-approved 12 treatments in 12 weeks, which can be used within 1 year from when the injury occurred. And if you would like more information about these parameters, please also refer to our ACC website for more details. So when there's a covered injury, what treatments can we pay for? Here on this slide is a list of what ACC can fund for acupuncturists. Now, it is up to you as the treating clinician to decide which of these funded treatment modality are best for your patient's covered injuries. And contrary to a very popular urban myth, needling side of the acupuncture is not compulsory every time. So in other words, you can choose any of the covered modalities, any of the funded modalities that is clinically appropriate. But whichever you choose, you need to show your clinical reasoning on why that is the most necessary and appropriate treatment for the covered injuries. For example, say if your patients sprained their ankle 3 days ago and it's puffed up twice as big, and your clinical records show that you decided to provide moxa to the head and auricular acupuncture instead. So in those instances where treatment seems very different to what's expected of the covered injury, it'd be very useful that we can see why in your treatment records. And here is a slide of the treatment modalities that ACC cannot pay for. So the first few are quite straightforward. And ACC doesn't pay for liniments, herbs, or herbal supplements, or the time spent dispensing these modalities. But the last one here is very important in the TCM acupuncture context, and that ACC does not pay for non-injury related treatment. For example, when the patient comes in with a right ankle sprain injury, and if you choose a distal or contralateral acupuncture points that relieves the pain, the inflammation, the swelling of the ankle, and at the same time, that also helps to tonify and nourish the spleen blood, or maybe smooth the liver qi to promote healing at the same time. And so you're literally curing several issues with one needle, and that may be appropriate. But when that physical ankle sprain injury is completely healed, say, for example, after 7 treatments, then even if you're using the same points and you're continuing the treatment, would no longer be appropriate, because the general ongoing need for nourishing and tonifying are related to the internal constitutions and dynamics of the body's harmony, and not the actual physical injury that was caused by the accident.
Cool. And we'll now move on to clinical records. So having good quality clinical records is just part of every treatment provider's job. Your professional body will have clear standards and guidelines on what they expect to see in good quality clinical notes. It's important to know that ACC has some additional things we need to see from you, and we've included them here. Some of them pretty obvious, like having a claim number and an injury diagnosis, very sensible. Everything else on the list is just as important, though, to show things like causation, that link between the accident, that physical injury, and the treatment you're now providing. Also to show just the good work that you're doing with a client, how you're measuring the impact of their injury and how what you're doing is improving their function. And not only having a treatment plan, but showing progress with the treatment plan and how you consider your client's progress each session to either continue or make adjustments or other recommendations as you go along. So you're always delivering treatment that is necessary and appropriate and the very best for the client. So this is just a really quick overview of this topic, and there is another webinar on clinical records. So we encourage everyone to go to our website and check out more information on this. Now, ACC also has a handful of position statements on our website, and they're topics that we have concerns about with regard to things like clinical safety or how the scheme is being used. So we've developed these statements. We've aligned them with professional standards and ethics and our legislation so that everyone is clear on our expectations of you and your responsibilities. So it's incredibly important that you take time to read through them so you can make sure you do the right thing if you find yourself in one of those situations. For example, with treatment of family or colleagues, the position statement explains that ACC will only fund treatment in very exceptional circumstances. It lays out what you need to document in your clinical records and why ACC takes the stance. So again, have a read and make sure you understand what you can and can't do.
Now let's talk about what to do when you need more treatments. So some of you may have already heard of the ACC 32 prior approval process. So when is it needed? You need ACC 32 process when the 12 sessions had been used, or it has been more than 12 weeks since the first acupuncture session. Bearing in mind, this includes treatment provided by another acupuncturist under the same claim prior to the patients coming to you. So it's important to find out that information. Or if there has been no previous acupuncture treatment under the claim, but it has been more than 1 year since the date of the accident. So again, if you want to check these claim informations, you can either find them through to when you take your claims history during your assessment, or you can contact ACC. When you put in your ACC 32 request, you will need to include the information that you see on these slides. You will need to include your clinical records. You will need to include an outcome measure, a patient treatment plan, and any other relevant medical information that you think would help ACC to consider this request. These other information may include a copy of the referral letter from the GP, for example, or a copy of the X-ray report from overseas that patient has brought in with them. So any information that you feel that can strengthen your request and support that causal link and the appropriateness of seeking more treatments. So what are the reasons do we need to complete an ACC 32? When we receive ACC 32 request, the ACC 32 requests are assessed on a case-by-case basis on its own merits, because we know that each individual circumstances may be different. So here are some of the scenarios when an ACC 32 request may be appropriate. For example, when patients recently had a surgery for a covered injury, if they have had an ankle sprain injury, which turned out to be a fracture, and they needed an ORIF surgery, and then afterwards they need some post-surgery treatment. Or when there is a covered mental injury claim, or if there are a serious injury cover. Now, it is important to bear in mind that when we say serious injury, it's not like, the patient has broke their ankle in 3 places and therefore it's a very serious injury, or the patient is very elderly, so the fall is more serious and it takes longer for them to recover than a young person. What ACC defines as serious injury here is things like, for example, traumatic brain injuries or spinal cord injuries or multiple amputations, etc. So these are severe and sometimes permanent or lifelong irreversible injuries that the patients may need to deal with for the rest of their lives. And when you put in an ACC 32 request, it is actually a very good reflection opportunity. And we encourage you to think about, why is more treatment needed? Has the treatment achieved the desired outcome or the expected effects? And if not, why not? So, and also to think about, are there other options to explore? For example, should the patients be referred back to see their GP for more investigation, or maybe an onward referral on to an orthopedic specialist? For more details of the ACC 32 prior approval process, again, please do check the ACC website. If you're submitting the ACC 32 electronically through the online form, as you can see on this slide here, we have highlighted the first question here. Unfortunately, this is a known issue with this ACC 32 online platform. And the question they asked you is this a first ACC 30 request from your clinic? Now, it is very important, and we'd like to ask you to always select no. As you can see, that's highlighted in this picture. Even if it is the first ACC 32 that you are filling out for your patient, always select no, because this then gives you the next step to attach your clinical records and give us your clinical rationale to support your request for treatment extension. Now, we are looking into a long-term solution for this problem, and we'll let you know when it's completed. But for now, please use this workaround. So again, always select no for this question. So here are some quick examples where an ACC 32 may be required. For example, if you supported your client for 4 sessions for a back sprain 2 years ago, so 2 years has passed since the date of injury and since your treatment, so you will need an ACC 32. Or if they've just had an injury-related surgery and has now come back for more treatments, and you will need to lodge an ACC 32. So here are some examples where ACC 32 may be declined. First, if clinical records are not attached with the ACC 32. So if you're using the online form, if you remember back to the 2 slides before, always select no, because that will only selecting no, that would enable you to attach your clinical notes. Other examples where ACC 32 may be declined is when causation is not demonstrated. As we explained before, causal link is very important. And especially when there has been huge gaps in treatment or when the accident occurred quite some time ago. Or, of course, the most obvious one, when treatment is being asked for a non-covered treatment injury. Now, sometimes when there are really gaps in the clinical information available, or if the clinical picture doesn't make sense, you may need to think about whether you need to refer the patient back to their GP for further investigations.
Right, in this next section about supporting quality, I'll talk to you about work that ACC does in the background to monitor the scheme and to support quality and the services we're paying for. So once a year, we'll send you a nice wee document that looks like this. So this is your ACC provider dashboard. It's a summary of data we've collected about you individually and shows how you compare to other acupuncturists that are working with ACC. So ACC has crazy amounts of data, and we're looking at this more and more as we go along. And we're getting better at understanding what it all might mean as well, and understanding how to use it. So when we run these dashboards and we compare providers, some will look a bit different. They won't look average. We know that these numbers only tell us part of the story though. So if there are areas where you look quite different, for example, if you've invoiced ACC for large numbers of treatments in a day, or where you're billing a lot more than other providers, we will likely want to talk to you about it. We have a small but fantastic team of performance monitoring advisors who do much of this work. And if your data comes up, they'll get in touch. They'll talk to you to understand your situation, and they'll explain any next steps. And now we're almost on the home stretch. So next up is getting set up and paid. Now, everything you need to register with ACC is on our website. Your provider ID is really important. It's how we know that you have the right qualifications and experience to work as an acupuncturist, because you can't get one, you can't get a provider ID without an annual practicing certificate. So we will check every year with your professional body that your APC is up to date. So aside from filling in a few forms, it's incredibly important that you read, understand, and complete all the onboarding resources too. You need to know the rules, the expectations, what to do and how to do it right. And if you're registering someone on their behalf, please make sure that you share the resources and documents with them. So when you register with ACC, you choose whether you want to be paid per treatment or based on time. The option you go with is totally up to you and what will work best for you in your practice. But whichever you choose, you can also ask clients for a co-payment, which is basically a top-up on what ACC pays you. Now, if you're billing per treatment, this is a fixed rate per treatment. There is one treatment allowed each day per client, and that's per client, not per injury. So that means if your client has more than one injury, you can't add up treatments for all the different injuries to give you more than one treatment in a day. And if your client does need more treatment for those other injuries, you'll need to get a prior approval. If you're billing based on time, we only pay for the time you spend directly with the client face to face. So if, for example, you step out of the room for 10 minutes, that 10 minutes doesn't count. Direct treatment also means that you can't bill ACC for more than 60 minutes in any 1 hour. It sounds really weird. What do we mean? So say your patient Ben arrives at 10 o'clock in the morning to start his treatment. You get him settled in, place some needles, and then your next client, Susan, arrives for her treatment a half hour later at 10:30. So you leave Ben with his needles in place in one room, and then you go and you get Susan settled and started in the next room. Once you've done that, you go back to Ben, and he leaves at 11 a.m. So he's been there for an hour. Ben and Susan have been in your clinic for a combined total of 90 minutes between 10 and 11 a.m. But you can only bill ACC for 60 minutes because there's only one of you and you can only be in direct treatment with one person at a time. And there are only 60 minutes in any 1 hour. So to invoice correctly, you'd need to split that 60 minutes between the two clients. So we'll pay up to a maximum of 60 minutes per client in one day. So if you go over 60 minutes, you can't bill ACC for that extra time. Your time can be rounded up to the nearest 5-minute increment or down. So if you provide direct face-to-face treatment for, say, 43 minutes, you could bill that as 45 minutes rounded up. But if you provide direct treatment for only 37 minutes, that should be rounded down and billed as 35 minutes. Now, if you work in a multidisciplinary team with, say, physios or chiropractors, and you're delivering treatments on the same day as those other providers, you need to know ACC generally only pays for one treatment from one specified treatment provider. So that's your acupuncturists, your physios, your chiropractors, and so on. So one treatment from one specified treatment provider per client per day. So we may pay for more if this meets our legislative requirements and is clinically justified, which comes back to the quality of your clinical records. Cool. So please sign up to our digital services. They allow you to do lots of things online really quickly, really easily. There's more information on our website, so please check it all out. And this brings us to our final section, which has got some handy contacts and reference links. Now, as I said at the beginning, of the presentation, ACC is huge. We've covered some of the basics today, but there's a lot more brilliant information available for you to use on our website that includes educational resources and modules tailored by profession. And we're always creating new resources too. So if there's anything you particularly want to learn more about, please let us know. And there are a few different teams at ACC who are all experts in their different areas. We're all here to help, so please feel free to get in touch with us when you need to. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. Now, Ben, can we have a look at the questions from the chat, please?
Yes, certainly. All right, so there's a few here, team. So first up, we had a question about a claim's starting date. Does it start from the date of lodgement and then expire after 52 weeks?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It really depends on whether the question is asking about the time that you can provide treatment. So with ACC claims, there are two important dates that you need to know. One is, of course, the accident date. Once the claim is accepted for cover, the claim is considered active in the ACC sense from the date of accident for 1 year. So, for example, if the injury is, say, on the 1st of April 2023, then the claim is considered active until 31st of March 2024. Within this 52 weeks period, you can activate that 12 acupuncture treatments at any time, provided if there has been no other acupuncture treatment already provided under the claim. So once you activate that 12 treatments, you will then have 12 weeks to complete your treatment. So what does that mean? In other words, if the accident date is the 1st of April 2023, and you start the first of your treatment on the 30th of March 2024, you will then have 12 weeks from the 30th of March 2024 to complete your 12 treatments. Now, of course, that's an extreme example, because if that happens, I guess the biggest question would be, why is the treatment needed at almost a year after the accident date, especially if the covered injury is a simple injury, maybe like a sprain or strain injury? So the question to ask is, why have the injury not resolved after a year? Because even with natural healing, we would expect the soft tissue injury to have resolved within weeks. So why hasn't it got better? What exactly are you treating in front of you right now? And is it still accident related? And that's when it's very important for you to demonstrate that your treatment is still causally linked to the covered injury.
Awesome, thanks for that, Javo. Sorry, is that it?
Yep, that's it.
Perfect. All right, I've got another one here on sensitive claims. So will we get paid when treating patients with sensitive claims?
The brief answer is generally yes, as long as the treatment is for the covered injury. So it really comes down to what the covered injury under the sensitive claim is, and whether it is within the scope of acupuncturists to treat it. So bearing in mind, it is very important to find out what the covered injury is under that sensitive claim. So that's pretty much the simple answer. Yeah.
Awesome, cheers. Another one here. What if there's an old injury, so more than 12 weeks have passed, and a person tripped, for example, and irritated their old back injury? Is this a situation for an ACC 32 request, or is it a new injury that needs to be lodged?
Yeah, again, another good question. But I think what the question probably didn't define was what is meant by the 12 week has passed, whether it is 12 weeks from the first acupuncture treatment, or is it 12 weeks from the date of accident? Say, for example, if the injury again was 1st of April 2023, and it's been 12 weeks after that. Now, normally we'd expect soft tissue injuries. The body would probably take care of most of the healing by the end of that 12 weeks. But if there had been no acupuncture treatment prior, then you can start the treatment without an ACC 32. Now, if there had been an acupuncture treatment prior, and it has been 12 weeks since that first acupuncture treatment, then yes, you will need to send in an ACC 32. But if you feel that there is a new accident and there's a new injury because of that accident, that means that it may need a new claim. So what you will then need to do is refer your patient back to their GP so that they can get a new claim lodged. And once that claim is lodged and cover accepted, you can then treat under the new claim.
Thanks, Duffo. Okay, another one here. Because we don't lodge ACC 45s, it is not us who determines causation. If we have concerns that a claim was lodged incorrectly, what should we do?
I think, first of all, I like to sort of correct the question slightly in the sense that it is important that when you're working with ACC claims, that as a clinician in our own right, as an acupuncturist, you are able to determine causation. And it is very important for you to determine causation because ultimately you are responsible for the service that you provide, and that the service that you provide is causally linked to the covered injury in order to be paid for that service. So that's the most important thing. Secondly, is that if you believe there are injuries that have been missed from the original claim, or you have discovered new injuries that you feel is related to the accident event itself and should have been covered, then what we do encourage you to do is to refer the patients back to their GP to add the cover to the claim. So the GP can do this through an ACC 18 medical certificate after they've reassessed the patient.
Great, thanks, Duffo. Got one last question here. What do we do if the patient has more than one claim?
Oh, would Tina like to take this one?
We talked about that earlier on one of the slides when it came to how to bill for them, and that, for example, if you're you can't add up the different injuries and have multiple treatments for those injuries on a particular day. It's just one treatment session covering those injuries per day, for example. And once you've finished treating, say, the first injury, but you've still got other injuries that are needing attention, if you've still got treatments left, then you would need to, you could address those other injuries as well. But if you're using up all of your treatments, then you'd need to be submitting ACC 32 requests. Do you have anything to add there, Charles?
No, that's pretty much it. I think it is very important. Again, we want to emphasize the importance of demonstrating that clinical rationale, that causal link in your clinical records, because often the information in there can determine whether the ACC 32 request is successful or not. Any other questions?
That's it for today. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Awesome. So we'd just like to thank everyone who attended the webinar and everyone who listens to this recording online. I hope you find everything in this useful and interesting and helpful for your ACC mahi moving forward. Quick final reminder to please check out all the amazing resources on the ACC website. You won't regret it. Ka kite.
Bye for now.